A pound of vanilla beans costs more than a pound of silver, sometimes twice as much. At peak prices, vanilla has sold for over $600 per pound. That makes it the second most expensive spice on earth, behind only saffron. And unlike saffron, which is expensive because harvesting it is labor-intensive, vanilla is expensive because producing it is nearly impossible. The vanilla orchid only blooms once a year. The flower opens for a single day, and it can only be pollinated by one species of bee that exists in one region of Mexico. Outside that region, the orchid doesn't reproduce naturally, which means every vanilla bean you've ever tasted required human intervention, hand pollination, one flower at a time, and 80% of the world's vanilla comes from a single island where cyclones, theft, and political instability can wipe out entire harvests overnight. This is the story of how the world's rarest spice became a billion-dollar trap. Welcome to The Botanical Historian, where plants, money, and scarcity collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it tastes. Before vanilla became a global commodity, it was a secret. The Aztecs discovered it growing wild in the forests of what is now Mexico. They called it Tili exochetal, which roughly translates to black flower, referring to the cured vanilla pod. The Aztecs didn't use vanilla as a standalone flavor. They mixed it with cacao to create a drink reserved for nobility and warriors. It was a luxury, a status symbol. And when the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 1500s and tasted it, they were captivated. Vanilla became one of the treasures the Spanish extracted from the New World, alongside gold, silver, and chocolate. But the Spanish quickly discovered a problem. They could take vanilla beans back to Europe. They could even take live vanilla orchids and plant them in botanical gardens. But the plants wouldn't fruit. The orchids grew. They flowered, but they never produced vanilla pods. For nearly 300 years, vanilla could only be harvested in Mexico. The Spanish tried growing it in the Philippines. The French tried in their Caribbean colonies. The Dutch tried in Java. Every attempt failed, and no one understood why. The answer was pollination. In nature, only one species can pollinate vanilla, the Melipona bee, native to Mexico. The bee is small enough and has the right anatomy to push past the rostellum and transfer pollen. Without that bee, the orchid can't reproduce. And the Melipona bee doesn't exist outside Mexico and Central America. So for centuries, vanilla remained a Mexican monopoly. The Spanish controlled the supply. They exported dried beans, and they charged whatever they wanted. But in 1841, everything changed. On the French island of Réunion, in the Indian Ocean, a 2-year-old enslaved boy named Edmund Albius discovered something that had eluded botanists for centuries. He figured out how to hand-pollinate vanilla. Using a thin stick in his thumb, he carefully lifted the rostellum and pressed the pollen-bearing anther against the stigma. The process took seconds, and it worked. For the first time, vanilla could be cultivated outside Mexico. Edmund's technique spread rapidly. French colonial authorities realized they could grow vanilla in their tropical colonies. Madagascar, just off the coast of East Africa, had the perfect climate. Hot, humid, ideal for vanilla orchids. Within decades, Madagascar became the center of global vanilla production, and it still is today. But here's the tragic irony. Edmund Albius, the person who made the global vanilla industry possible, died in poverty. He was never compensated for his discovery. He received no recognition during his lifetime. And after slavery was abolished in Réunion, he struggled to find work. He died in 1880, largely forgotten. Meanwhile, the technique he invented generated billions of dollars in wealth for European colonial powers and the traders who controlled the vanilla supply. Madagascar's dominance in vanilla production isn't accidental. It's structural. The island has the right climate, but more importantly, it has cheap labor. Vanilla cultivation is extraordinarily labor-intensive. The orchids must be hand-pollinated. Each flower blooms for only one day. Miss the window, and that flower produces nothing. During pollination season, workers move through plantations every morning, inspecting thousands of flowers, pollinating the ones that are ready. It's precision work, it's exhausting, and it's repetitive. After pollination, the beans take 9 months to mature. Then they're harvested green and cured through a complex process that takes another 3 to 6 months. The beans are blanched in hot water, then wrapped in blankets and left to sweat, fermenting slowly to develop their flavor. They're sun-dried during the day and stored at night. The process requires constant attention, and at the end, a single orchid produces only a handful of beans. This is why vanilla is so expensive. It's not just rare, it's labor-intensive at every stage of production, and Madagascar's near monopoly creates catastrophic vulnerability. When cyclones hit the island, which happens frequently, vanilla crops are destroyed. Prices spike. In 2017, Cyclone Inawo wiped out a significant portion of Madagascar's harvest. vanilla prices tripled almost overnight, reaching historic highs. Suddenly, vanilla was more expensive than silver. Bakeries, ice cream manufacturers, and fragrance companies scrambled to secure supply. Some reformulated their products to use less vanilla. Others switched to synthetic alternatives. But the cyclones aren't the only threat. Vanilla theft has become a massive problem in Madagascar. Because the beans are so valuable, they're often called green gold. Thieves target farms, stealing unripe beans before harvest. The beans are worthless when harvested early. They haven't developed flavor, but thieves sell them anyway, often to unscrupulous buyers who mix them with legitimate stock. Farmers have responded by hiring armed guards, sleeping in their fields, and harvesting beans earlier than optimal, just to prevent theft. Some mark their beans with invisible ink or UV dye to prove ownership. It's agricultural warfare driven by commodity prices. And the problem cascades. When farmers harvest early to avoid theft, the quality drops. Lower quality beans sell for less, which pressures farmers to grow more, which intensifies competition for land and labor, which creates more theft. It's a vicious cycle driven by scarcity and demand. And at the center of it all is a crop that requires hand-pollination, 9 months to mature, and months of careful curing. There's no shortcut. There's no mechanization. There's no way to scale production quickly. Which is why most vanilla flavor isn't actually vanilla. Walk into a grocery store and look at the ingredient labels. Most products that taste like vanilla contain vanillin, a synthetic compound that mimics vanilla's primary flavor molecule. Real vanilla contains over 250 different flavor compounds. Vanillin is just one of them. But it's the most prominent, and it's cheap to produce. Synthetic vanillin can be made from wood pulp, petroleum byproducts, or even coal tar. It costs a fraction of real vanilla, and for most consumers, it's indistinguishable. In fact, over 95% of vanilla-flavored products use synthetic vanillin, not real vanilla. That vanilla ice cream, that vanilla latte, that vanilla-scented candle, almost certainly synthetic. Only premium brands use real vanilla extract. And even then, they often blend it with synthetic vanillin to stretch supply. The economics are unavoidable. Real vanilla is too expensive for mass-market products. But the existence of synthetic vanillin creates another problem for Madagascar. If prices get too high, more companies switch to synthetic. Demand for real vanilla drops, prices collapse. And Malagasy farmers, who've invested time and labor into cultivation, are left with unsellable crops. The market is trapped in a boom and bust cycle. When supply is tight, prices soar. When supply recovers, prices crash. And the farmers, who have no control over global markets, bear all the risk. This is the paradox of vanilla. It's incredibly valuable and incredibly vulnerable. The entire global supply depends on a single island using a technique discovered by a 2-year-old slave nearly 200 years ago. There's no backup, no diversified supply chain, no alternative production method. If a disease sweeps through Madagascar's vanilla orchids, the way Panama disease is sweeping through banana plantations, the global supply would collapse. And there's no plan for that. Attempts to diversify have failed repeatedly. Other countries have tried to compete with Madagascar, Indonesia, Uganda, Papua New Guinea, India. But Madagascar has advantages that are hard to replicate. Decades of cultivation expertise, established relationships with international buyers, infrastructure, however limited, designed around vanilla export, and a labor force willing to work for wages that make vanilla profitable. Other regions can grow vanilla, but they can't compete on price. And in commodity markets, price is everything. So the world remains dependent on Madagascar. And Madagascar remains dependent on a crop that's vulnerable to weather, theft, disease, and market volatility. It's a fragile system built on historical accident. If the Melipona bee had existed in more places, vanilla wouldn't be a monopoly. If Edmund Albius hadn't figured out hand-pollination, vanilla might still be a Mexican exclusive. If synthetic vanillin didn't exist, demand for real vanilla would be even higher and the market even more unstable. Every part of the vanilla economy is contingent on factors outside anyone's control. And yet vanilla endures, because despite the cost, the labor, and the risk, real vanilla is irreplaceable. Synthetic vanillin might mimic the flavor, but it doesn't capture the complexity. But most people don't taste the difference. Most people eat vanilla ice cream and never think about where it comes from. And that's fine. But it means the market for real vanilla is limited, dependent on a small segment of consumers willing to pay premium prices. And as long as that's true, vanilla will remain expensive, labor-intensive, and vulnerable. The history of vanilla is the history of exploitation dressed up as luxury. The Aztecs cultivated it, the Spanish stole it, the French enslaved people to grow it, and today, Malagasy farmers work for poverty wages to produce a crop that sells for more than silver. The wealth doesn't flow to the people who grow it. It flows to traders, exporters, and corporations who control the supply chain. The farmers get a fraction of the retail price. The rest disappears into the middlemen. This is the pattern with every luxury commodity. Coffee, cacao, saffron. The people who do the work earn the least. The people who control the distribution earn the most. And the consumers, insulated from the labor and the suffering, pay premium prices and assume it's just expensive because it's rare. It's rare because producing it is brutal, and it's brutal because the system is designed to extract maximum value at minimum cost. Vanilla is worth more than silver not because it's hard to find, but because it's hard to make. Every bean represents months of labor. Every bottle of extract represents thousands of hand-pollinated flowers. And every time you use vanilla, you're participating in an economy built on a 1-2-year-old slave's ingenuity and centuries of exploitation. History doesn't repeat, but the logic of commodity production never changes. Find something people want. Make it hard to get. Control the supply. Charge whatever the market will bear. And when the system collapses, and it always does, the people at the bottom suffer most. If you learn something today, imagine what you'll learn next. Subscribe, the world is full of secrets, and we aren't done uncovering them.